Hello. So my name's Danielle, and I am the outreach coordinator with NWVeg. And NWVeg is an organization that's dedicated to celebrating and educating folks on how they can live veg-friendly lives. So you don't have to be a 100% vegan to be a part of our NWVeg events. You don't have to be vegetarian. You could be eating a turkey sandwich right now. Our whole goal is to create experiences and spaces where people feel safe and excited about learning different opportunities to try out veg-friendly cooking, veg-friendly living in general. So what we're going to be doing today is I'm going to be making chai tea, which is just chai. Chai in of itself means tea. So we're going to be making chai, and then we're also going to be making a basic cookie recipe that works really well in a lot of different areas. So you can turn it into a lemon sugar cookie, a basic sugar cookie, a snickerdoodle. You can make like an almond joy cookie with chocolate chips and coconut and almond extract. So it's a great basic foundation. And it also works really well as a gluten-free option, which I can dive into a little bit. But let's get started with making our chai. So I really love this recipe. I think if you're somebody who finds yourself dipping into Starbucks on a regular basis, trying to get a chai to go, I think you'll find this recipe. You can tinker with it if you want something a little stronger, you want something a little more mild or sweet. It's very versatile. So you can tinker with all of these ingredients and figure out what works best for you. But I'm gonna go ahead and start with, and I'll show you each ingredient. So we're gonna do a thumb of ginger, and because ginger is a fresh ingredient and it always comes in different shapes and sizes, usually you'll hear people just kind of give just a measurement for thumbs. And so we're looking for, I like a fair amount of ginger, but I don't like this much. So I'll probably cut maybe a third of this off. But this is what fresh ginger looks like. And I've peeled some of it right here so you can see it kind of has kind of a melony or an apple texture. So we're gonna do a thumb of fresh ginger, and I'll go ahead and cut that off. Now, if you're somebody who doesn't have access to fresh ginger, you can usually find it in the grocery store. If you can't find it at the grocery store in the produce department, Asian markets always have it as well. But there are a couple of alternatives that you can do. You can use something like this, pureed ginger, and it's basically, I don't know if you can see in there, it's kind of liquidy, it's kind of runny. It's almost like a very loose paste. And if you're going to use a puree, you would want to use a little bit more. There's some additives in here that keep it preserved and things like that. So it's not going to pack the same punch using fresh ginger. And then you can also use dried ginger, and dried ginger is a bit the opposite. So it's a lot more concentrated. So you're not going to want to put in a thumb's worth of dried ginger into your chai unless you absolutely love that. So you're gonna wanna tinker. I would say to replicate a thumb's worth of ginger fresh, I would start with maybe like 3/4 of a teaspoon of dried ginger. So I'm gonna go ahead and finish peeling this and cutting it. And then for this recipe, I use a mortar and pestle. And that's usually the way that most folks are traditionally who are making chai. They are usually going to be using a mortar and pestle as well. If you don't have one, there's a couple of alternatives that you can use. But so I chopped up my ginger here because we're going to be pounding it away in our pestle. And so I've got the nice heavy part here. And so this is my mortar and pestle. There's a couple of things if you do find yourself loving chai so much that you're making it on a regular basis, you're going to want a couple of different aspects. First of all, you're going to want to read the reviews and or the descriptions and see if this is something that holds on to the scent. A lot of them, when you make something fragrant, the coarse stone ends up holding on to the scent of whatever it is you're working with. So if you were to crush garlic in this and then you wanted to make your chai, then all of a sudden you have garlicky chai. So you'll want to read the reviews and see if people are complaining about it holding on to that. But even the best mortar and pestle usually will have a little bit of that aspect going on. So as a tip that I recommend for that situation is always rinse out your mortar and pestle when you are done with it. Do not use soap. And then you can use like salt if you needed to scrub something that's dried out on there. And then I would put, you can put baking soda or you can put rice, just raw rice, dry rice in it. And that does a really good job of drawing out the moisture and also drawing out any of the scent that was left in there. So that way you don't end up with garlicky chai the next time you make it. So you don't have to worry about getting this the most pulverized. I'm going to show you what we're looking at. Oh, that's a little dark. So let me grab my flashlight here. You don't have to worry about making it the most crushed, because what we're really doing is just getting the essence of this out. There we go. So we're just trying to get the juices out. We're trying to make it so there's enough surface area that when we're boiling it, the milk is going to absorb that flavor. And then we're going to want to do about, this is also a tough one to measure, 2 tablespoons of loose cinnamon or broken cinnamon sticks. So again, because I have my mortar and pestle, I've got my cinnamon sticks here. I would absolutely recommend checking out the YouTube channel Epicurious and watching their spice experts tell you the different signs that you're looking for when you are purchasing spices. It's really educational. It's great. It teaches you about what attributes you are looking for when you're buying cinnamon sticks, when you're buying vanilla beans, paprika, all kinds of things, because fresh spices can be pricey, and it can be really frustrating if you pay a lot of money for something that's supposed to be a good quality, and really you're kind of maybe getting the dregs. So I'm putting in my cinnamon. It's right in there with the ginger. The ginger's just gonna get extra crushed. And again, just like with the ginger, we don't have to worry about getting this cinnamon ground down to a powder or anything like that. We're just breaking it up. We're getting that cinnamon into the ginger. We're making it so when we put it into our milk, it's going to absorb that. And I will show you, turn on my flashlight here. So you can see I still have some bits in there. It's not ground down too much. And then we're gonna do 1 teaspoon of cardamom. So you can use just you can get cardamom seeds if you want, or you can also use the pods. This is what a cardamom pod looks like. Kind of like I would say they're about the size of a pistachio without the shell. So it depends. If you're using just the seeds, you're gonna wanna use 1 teaspoon. If you're using the pods, you're gonna wanna use a little bit more because those pods take up quite a bit of space. So I would say probably a tablespoon is a good starting spot if you're using the pods. Again, if you were using something like with the cinnamon and with the cardamom, if you are going to be using powders that are already done, I would start off small, and you can always add in more because you don't have to steep it as long to get that flavor because it's already ground up. It's ready to be absorbed by whatever you're putting it in. Now, before I ground this, I'm going to go ahead and add my nutmeg. Let's see here. Where do I keep my nutmeg? Here we go. So I'm going to add nutmeg. So there's a couple different ways you can do it. You can use you can get a microplane and you can grate your nutmeg, or you can also just use the powder in this one. Either one is fine. I'm just using a normal powder. So I just go ahead and put that in there. And then also we're going to be using cloves. And with the powdered cloves, oh boy, a little bit goes a long way. So I really wouldn't recommend using the powdered cloves unless you're really confident with kind of experimenting and maybe having too much cloves. With the whole cloves, they're kind of tough to get the, here's what they look like. They kind of look like stickers. They're kind of tough to get the flavor out of, so you can be a little bit more generous. So if I am using whole cloves, then I would go ahead and start with maybe a teaspoon, half a teaspoon, kind of depending on your flavor. And then the last thing we're going to do is I'm going to put in some peppercorns. That's just going to give a background heat to it. If you're somebody who likes a spicy chai, you're obviously going to want to use more peppercorns, and you can experiment. You can use white peppercorns or pink. Those are going to bring a little bit more heat to that. So let me go get my peppercorns. So I just use, you know, the same kind of peppercorns that you would put in your pepper grinder. And again, we're not using too much of that. Like I would say we're going to use, for me, for the amount of heat that I like, I would do anywhere from half of a teaspoon to a fourth of a teaspoon of the peppercorns. And now I'm just going to go ahead and grind this all up. And again, we don't have to worry about getting it too ground up. Go ahead and turn on the heat on my milk here. So while you're doing this, you can go ahead and put a pot of half of a cup of water and half of a cup of the milk of your choice. I like to use oat milk or soy milk. Soy milk is nice because it brings a kind of natural sweetness to it. Oat milk is nice because it's a pretty balanced, neutral milk. Almond milk can curdle a little easier and it's a little thinner, but it works in a pinch too. So I'm just gonna grind this up till I've got nice kind of, it's almost gonna look like a very fragrant jerky. Let me get my flashlight here to show you. So you can see there, you can see all the little pods. I'll get some out here and put it on my hand. There we go. So it's just loose. The moisture that's in this is all from that ginger. Everything else that I've been grinding in this has been pretty dry. So I've put in my pot, I've got my half cup milk and my half cup water. You can absolutely use more milk if you want, or you can also use more of the water if you're somebody who maybe just doesn't like creaminess as much. But the milk is important to some degree because a big part of chai is aerating and having kind of that fluffiness that you are going to be putting into the tea at the end. And water just doesn't aerate the same way that milk does. So you want the milk to be going at a hard simmer. My milk is almost there. And I'm gonna go ahead and get out my other ingredients while I'm waiting for it. So we're gonna be using 1 heaping tablespoon of loose leaf black tea. If you don't have loose leaf black tea, you can absolutely use any black tea pouch that you have in a pinch. And that also is very important. If you don't have something to strain it, go ahead and use a pouch, because you will want a strainer because we're putting all of this other stuff in there, but a tea strainer can be a little bit more fine. So if you don't have something like that, no worries. You can make do with like a cheesecloth. Something that I often use is we've got these produce bags that are kind of like a mesh, and you can see it's got like a nice line, little holes through it. So I use that if I need to use a strainer. There's a couple of different options, but a tea strainer is best for this situation. So I'm going to be using a heaping tablespoon of that, as well as a heaping tablespoon of sugar. And again, this is to taste. So if you're like somebody who wants it a little sweet, you're there for the sweet chai, then absolutely add more sugar to whatever it is that you are looking for. So as soon as my milk comes to a hard simmer, we don't want it to be at a full boil because that can be a shock to the tea. If you've ever oversteeped your tea or you've ever put your tea in too hot of water, you can tell it has that kind of unpleasant taste on the back of the tongue. So we just want it to be at a nice hard simmer, I'll say, like right before it's boiling. And we also don't want it to curdle. So in a perfect world, you'll be doing this on kind of a heavier pot. Just because if you're using it on a thinner pot, you can scald the bottom of it. And you also want to make sure that you're not using it, if you were making it in any kind of pot, that you want to have a pretty decent amount of level in there. You don't want to be using a really big pot and only having maybe like 1/4 of an inch of it, because that's the only pot you can use. Wash one of the smaller pots, because again, we've got too much surface tension. You're going to evaporate too much. You're going to scald the bottom of it, and that's not going to work out very well. So my milk is just now getting to that hard simmer. So once that happens, I'm going to turn it off the heat. I'm going to go ahead and add all of my seasonings. I'm going to stir that in. And it's so aromatic, like your whole house is going to smell like cinnamon, nutmeg, cardamom. It's a beautiful smell. So we're going to let that sit for just about 10, 15 seconds, just kind of let all of that unlock, let that ginger loosen up. Being in that hot milk and water, it's going to be both loosening up and the milk is going to be absorbing that flavor. So we want to give that just a second, and then we'll go ahead and get our heaping tablespoons. And because this is so, you can use just a kitchen spoon. It doesn't have to be a precise tablespoon. So we'll go ahead and add our sugar, 1 heaping tablespoon. And we'll go ahead and add our tea, 1 heaping tablespoon. Give it a little stir. Set a timer. Alexa, set a timer for 2 minutes.
2 minutes, starting now.
So you don't want to over steep your tea. That's why I set that timer. Never steep your tea, especially a black tea, unless it has specific instructions for longer than 2 minutes. Otherwise, you have this kind of bell curve of like adding flavor, adding flavor, adding flavor. Now it's peaked at the flavor that it can give and put into that milk and water. And now it's going to be getting bitter. And some of those oils are getting unlocked that are in the teas. And then that starts coming out. And that's what puts that bad, bitter taste on the back of your throat. So just to show you a little bit of, see if I can show what this black tea looks like. When it's loose, it's nice, it's dried. Epicurious has an episode that talks about selecting fresh loose leaf tea as well, which is great.
This device lost its connection.
Oh, looks like I'm going to go ahead and make sure that I have a separate timer going. I'm going to set it for 1 minute. And hopefully I haven't lost my internet connection, but you can give it a little stir if you want. At this point, since it's not boiling, it's just steeping, that's fine. You don't have to cover it. You absolutely can if you want to, but this isn't, it's a little bit more like the jazz of tea in the fact that you don't have to be as worried about making sure that you're following the steps as precisely as you would if you were making like a proper cup of black tea. Let me go grab my strainer. So you can also use a French press if you needed to strain in a pinch, that would work as well. Also, if you don't have a mortar and pestle, but you wanted to use fresh ingredients, you could use a burr grinder. You know, like the kind of grinder that you would use if you're using whole coffee beans. Look at that, all my timers are set right. Alexa, stop. So now it's time for me to go ahead and strain and aerate my tea. So I have this really cool little tea basket. It fits right inside of my teacup. So I just go ahead and I'll show you what's in the pot here. Let me bring up my flashlight so you can see. So you can see it's kind of like a nice brown color, lots of steam coming off of it. So we'll go ahead and pour this in. And I like to take all of the dregs that are in here, and I like to just go ahead and put it in my strainer. And then I want to push that through so that way I'm getting every drop of the flavor that we just worked so hard using the mortar and pestle for. And so this is what I've got going on here. This is my basket of all of everything. This is my tea. And then I just push. What I'm doing is I'm pushing this through and having it drip down. So I'm getting all that flavor. And this is an important step too, just because this is where a lot of the remaining, that good pop of flavor of your ginger, your black tea is, and you don't want to miss out on it. But you also want to make sure that notice how I'm doing it out of the water now, because I don't want to oversteep. I don't want that milk keeping this hot. And then this makes great compost. You can go ahead and put it in your compost. And then if I was going to be doing the aerating, I could use an aerating wand that a lot of folks like to use on their milk. But you can also, a lot of folks in India will just take cups and they will pour it from very high up, pour it down, and then pour it back, get that flowing in there. I'm not going to try to do that right now because my laptop is over my sink, so that seems a bit dangerous. But I will show you our final product. My house smells so good. I've got this nice steamy cup of tea. So now that we have our chai, we're ready to go ahead and make this cookie recipe. And I'm super excited to share this with you today because this is a recipe that is linked to my childhood, and something that I'm always talking about with folks is, my degree was originally in sociology. So that's what my educational background is in. But I have a strong passion for food. And so something that I am constantly thinking about is our connection of our culture, our history, our self-identity with the foods that we eat. And what that means to me is so often people, when they're in a situation where they have to change what they eat, whether it's because they have a food allergy, because their religion they've maybe changed religions and there are new food restrictions, or maybe they moved somewhere and the foods that they're used to eating aren't available where they are. There's so many reasons. When that happens, that can be a really intense loss for that part of you, because when we eat, we are connecting with the journey of who we are today. There's actually a study done years ago where they had people who didn't know each other and they had people who did know each other. So they did two separate groups. And they had people just stand in a room that didn't really have anything else. They were just like standing and had a discussion about something totally benign, like the weather. And then they recreated the same situation, but they had the people sitting down at a table and there was food on the table. Pizza, chips and salsa, pretzels, didn't matter. And again, people who knew each other, people who didn't know each other, talking about something benign, like the weather. And what they found in those situations, both with people who knew each other and people who didn't know each other, is that our stress hormone levels are on the rise when we are seated at a table and we are eating food. And it doesn't matter whether we know the person sitting across from us or whether or not we've known them for years. And it doesn't matter if we're talking about politics or how our job is going or something like the weather. We are extra stimulated when we are sitting in the presence of food. Doesn't even matter if you're eating it. So when we think about moving into the holidays and we think about spending time with people that maybe we haven't seen for a while, and I know that this year is weird because we aren't going to be sitting down at the same table with them. But historically, when we sit down and we have a dish that someone's put a lot of time and energy into, which does add to that unspoken emphasis of expectations for the situation, then we're in a situation where we're going to have that elevated stimulation level. So when I keep that in mind, when I talk to folks who are interested in becoming vegetarians and vegans, when I talk to veterans of vegan lifestyle, long time veteran vegans, vegetarians, things like that, when I talk to anyone who has a new food restriction, something that I always tell them is 100%, absolutely, you should feel like you can advocate for your new dietary needs, and you should feel like your family members and your loved ones and your friends and your community should rise up to that challenge. But at the same time, we have to recognize that when we make a new food path for ourselves, there are people in our lives who connected with us throughout that food. So my example is when I first became a vegan, my mom, I would come home for Christmas and she would make me these cookies, among other things, and they always had the butter in them. And I would have to be like, oh, you know, Mom, I'm really trying not to eat butter. That's a thing that I don't eat anymore. And it was hard for her, but also like I had to recognize that for her, when she's making those cookies, it becomes a physical, tangible representation of her love and of her enthusiasm for who we've become today. So when she's at the store and she's buying the milk and she's buying the butter and she's buying the sugar, she's thinking about, oh, I'm so excited. I'm so excited to see Danielle. I'm so excited for Christmas. I'm so excited for the holidays. This is going to be great. And as she's kneading the dough and she's adding in the ingredients, you're almost summoning the future that you hope to have with that person. And you're thinking about the past that you had with them. This is a cookie recipe that I grew up making as a little girl. And so she's probably thinking about all of the times that she taught me to make these cookies. This recipe was given to my mom from her home ec class in the 50s in the Midwest in Kansas from Sister Prudentia at her Catholic middle school. So this comes with a lot of history. So I'm always really passionate at helping people remember that when we are changing our food, we need to bring some of that with us because it is a part of our history. It's a part of how we got here today. And so that's why I'm so passionate about doing my best to modify foods so that I can take it with me today and tomorrow and not have to pack them up and say goodbye. And now I've been able to create that tradition where I am making these cookies with my mom and we use the ingredients so that I can enjoy them as well. And we can make new memories and it can become a new chapter in our history of cooking together. So let me go ahead and get our chai ingredients out of the way here. So this is essentially at the beginning, at its core, is a sugar cookie. It's the kind of cookie that's going to be both chewy and a little bit of crunch on the edges. So it's not going to be a soft Toll House cookie like you might get at the grocery store or something. So it's going to have some like oomph to it, but it's not a dry shortbread cookie either. So what we're going to be doing is I'm going to go ahead and get my mixing bowl here. First, though, I will show you. So this is a finished product. This is a cookie that I put just some pink sugar cookie on, and I'll go ahead and break it. So you can see like it did have a little bit of bend to it. It's not a crunch, again, like that shortbread. You can see it's got pretty good distribution. A little bit of crunch to it. So that was basic sugar cookie. And as we go, I'll teach you how we can modify it so you can make one recipe and make several different kinds of cookies. So our first step, what we're going to want to do is we're going to be taking our butter, which I was just talking about. I don't eat butter, but this is a product I really enjoy using. It's called Earth Balance. You can also find, if you're going to make a lot of cookies, Smart Balance usually comes in bigger containers. Earth Balance and Smart Balance are both found at Safeway, Fred Meyer, Albertsons. They're both very easy to find at most grocery stores. And just to show you, it looks pretty much like normal margarine or butter. So I'm going to go ahead and put the butter in this. And let me bring up the amount so that I can tell you the specific recipe. So for this, I'm making a half batch because I made cookies last night so I could have the finished product to show you. But I'm going to give you the whole amount. And the whole amount is going to make, depending on the size of cookies that you make, it's going to make about 2 dozen cookies. So it's a big batch. But so we're going to have, that was 1 cup of margarine or butter. For me, it is Earth Balance. So 1 cup of that. And then half of a cup of oil. So I've got my half of a cup of oil here. I'm going to add that in. And then 1 cup of sugar. So, and With this, I am using just cane sugar. You can use white sugar. Sometimes some folks like to just try to use organic stuff. If you are baking for someone who identifies as vegetarian or vegan, I would just check and ask with them. Some vegetarians and vegans are more sensitive to using white sugar. Others like it when something that's a little bit more of the raw sugar cane. So you can just check with them. So adding my sugar. And then let me bring that back up here. So that was 1 cup of sugar. We're gonna do 1 cup of powdered sugar. So I've got my 1 cup of powdered sugar. And then the original recipe from Sister Prudentia called for 2 eggs. So with vegetarian and vegan cooking, we kind of have to figure out how we can alter that. So what I like to do for an egg recipe, and this is the same egg replacer that I used when I ran a vegan gluten-free bakery for several years. This is an egg replacer recipe that we created for our baked goods, and it's worked great, is you use 3 tablespoons of milk, soy milk in this case. I've got a little bit of vanilla floating in there, but so we use 3 tablespoons equals 1 egg. And I'm gonna give you this, all of this together equals 1 egg. 3 tablespoons of soy milk, half of a tablespoon of ground flaxseed, and half of a teaspoon of agar powder. I'm gonna show you both of the containers for that, so that way you can kind of know. Agar powder you can usually find in the whole food section of most grocery stores. You can absolutely find it somewhere like a Whole Foods. Asian restaurants, or I'm sorry, Asian grocery stores absolutely have them. I ordered this on Amazon. This is way more agar powder than most folks are going to use because, again, I just told you 1 egg equals half of a teaspoon. So this is a ton of them. But I am used to buying this because I used to do a lot of baking, so I like to just keep it on hand. So agar powder. And then for our flaxseed, let me see what I did. Oh, here it is. So Bob's Red Mill makes a wonderful flaxseed. You're gonna wanna make sure that you get the flaxseed meal, not just flax seeds, because if they are the kind that look like tiny little apple seeds, they're not gonna disperse throughout the baking as well, and they're not gonna do their job. So what we're doing when we put in an egg replacer is we're both creating structure, we're adding liquid, and we're adding fat. So our soy milk is adding the little bit of fat and the liquid. Our agar powder is going to be the structure. It like helps solidify. You know, when we bake that egg, it kind of gels up. And then our flaxseed does the same, but it also helps with the structure. So we're not going to add our flaxseed and our agar powder into this because this is our wets. And so that would be a little funky, but I am going to go ahead and add the soy milk with the vanilla. So that's, since this recipe calls for 2 eggs, you would be using, since 1 egg equals 3 tablespoons of soy milk, you would be using 6 tablespoons of soy milk, and then 1 full tablespoon of flaxseed, 1 full teaspoon of agar powder. That would be your equivalent of the 2 eggs that you're using. 1 teaspoon of vanilla, and then you beat this until it is fluffy. And because everything is so soft, because I had it out for the demo, I'm just going to go ahead and hand whisk it. It doesn't really need to be mixed up too thoroughly. The nice thing is, and I know that I've said this in some other cooking demos, this is a stage where you can't overmix. You know, when you're making cookies, muffins, quick breads, anything like that, you often can overmix, and that's going to create a dense cookie. You're not going to have those air bubbles in it. It's not going to be a good texture. If you overmix your cake, it might not rise because you overmixed it. So, but in this instance, when you're doing anything with your sugars and your fats, you cannot overmix it. When I ran the bakery, I literally I could walk away and go downstairs and go grab a couple of other ingredients. And then I would be able to come back and not be worried if I overmixed it. I'm gonna grab my old-fashioned hand mixer here for just a minute. So I know that we're going to be showing this demo for the folks at Mirabella, and this is one of my favorite kitchen tools. I had one of these when I was a kid, absolutely loved it. Got my hair caught in it a couple of times. So this is just one of my favorite things, but it is a fun way to do the mixing without having to whisk. So we're gonna mix this, and then as soon as we get this to the state that we want it, which it really just needs to be melted and mixed. So if you were using that butter, that Earth Balance or Smart Balance, if you got it out, even 15, 20 minutes early, it's gonna be nice and soft. It actually has a much lower melting rate than traditional butter, so you're not gonna have to worry about it. So now, grab my flashlight here. Got it, it's nice, it's creamy. So got that set up, and now we are going to mix in our dries. So for the dries, I have sifted together 4 cups of flour. And this is the cookie that I just showed you, plus the flour I'm using right now. It is a gluten-free flour. You can absolutely use traditional flour in this recipe. It was created for a traditional one. I often use Bob's Red Mill 1-to-1 baking flour. That's a great one. This is a flour blend that I made from scratch, featuring brown rice and white rice, a little bit of sorghum, tapioca starch. This is the same flour mix that I used at my bakery. But the Bob's Red Mill works great in a pinch as well. So we've got 4 cups of flour. We've got 1 teaspoon of baking soda, and then 1 teaspoon of cream of tartar, and 1/4 of a teaspoon of salt. And just some notes on that. Cream of tartar is something that you often see in snickerdoodle recipes, but you don't see them very often in others. You don't often find them in like chocolate chip cookies or things like that. Cream of tartar is actually really important. It does a couple of different things. One, if you've ever tasted it, it's very tart. So sometimes if you're somebody who has a sensitive palate, you can taste that tanginess in snickerdoodle cookies. If you use a lot of that, you're gonna get that tang. But on the other hand, the other thing it does is it's a stabilizer. So it's one of those things also that when things rise up, the cream of tartar stabilizes it and keeps it in place. So you would see like cream of tartar in like soufflés or anything like that where you are wanting to help get something to raise up and then stay that way and not collapse back down. Cream of tartar is great for that. The other thing that I wanted to mention is with salt. So this is a question that somebody was asking the other day. I have a coarse salt and I have a fine salt. And they were saying like, does it matter which one I use? Absolutely, yes it does. And the reason why it does is because our coarse salt is not going to dissolve when it meets the wet as quickly and as easily and as evenly as our fine salt will. So it might wear down a little bit, but it may still have that full granule intact to some degree. And so that's going to create a system where someone might take a bite and be able to notice the salt a little bit more. What we want the salt to do in these recipes is it should be highlighting the other flavors. It elevates the vanilla. It helps accentuate the sweetness of the sugar without it being overbearing. So the saltness should be a background support cast. And if we use a coarse ground salt, then it would be something that people might be able to taste and notice. So we're gonna go ahead and mix our dries in with our wets. And if you are making this with gluten-free flour, then this is absolutely something that you don't have to worry about over mixing. it can absolutely handle it. If you are using traditional flour, then you do want to mix it until it's just done, right? You don't, I'll show you what I would mix it to if I was using a traditional flour. Similar to pancakes, you know, you just don't want to overmix it, or any kind of cake batter. So I would, as you can see, I haven't been stirring it for that long, but I would use it, I would stop probably right around here if I was using a traditional flour. But because I'm using a gluten-free flour, gluten-free, we're not breaking up those bindings. We're not, you know, we don't have the gluten in the flour trying to create a bridge and a structure. We're not doing that. Also, gluten-free flours, oftentimes, you know, you've got that brown rice, you've got that white rice, they can be a little dry, which is why sometimes people have dry, gritty, gluten-free things. So you can actually get a benefit from over mixing with these because we're beating in the moisture with that, right? Like we're working that in. So now we've got this nice lump of dough here. Let's see if I can get him to come out. There we go. It should have a texture where it's normal cookie dough. It shouldn't be too dry and crumbly, but you should be able to feel the sugar in it still. So this is going to go into the refrigerator covered. So you're gonna want to get out some foil. And you'll want to cover this. You want to cover it pretty tightly because this recipe can dry out pretty easily. And this goes in the fridge for 2 hours. So put that in the fridge. I made some last night, so I've got some here. And while this is warming up, I'm just going to go ahead and go over how do we change this so that it can be versatile and it can be something that would be a lemon sugar cookie or a snickerdoodle. It's as easy as putting in extract. So I could cut that dough in half, and I could end up taking half of that, putting it in the bowl, taking some lemon extract. For the recipe, the size that we're making, I would use maybe a tablespoon of lemon extract, work it in the dough, or you can use lemon sugar, which is really good, a fun specialty sugar. So you could do that. And then you can also just take your dough and get yourself your cinnamon and sugar topping. Oops. Which I have here, which is for the snickerdoodles I made earlier, and just toss them in that cinnamon and sugar. Also, you can use a coconut extract or an almond extract. I really like it when I take the almond extract and I put in a little bit of that. I would say maybe for if you're doing half of a batch, I would put in probably a tablespoon of almond extract, and then mix that in. And then mix in some chocolate chips. And then you can also do something like, I made some of these last night without the chocolate chips, some toasted coconut. And so that's really good for like an almond joy cookie that you can do as well. You can do a chocolate chip orange cookie. There are so many options for things that you can do with this dough. So it's great because you can just make up one batch and then you can separate it out and then you can make the different kinds of cookies that you want. So if you're going to a party and you were supposed to bring something for a cookie exchange, you're covered. So I'm going to go ahead and take out my dough here. And so this dough can sit in the fridge for longer than 2 hours. If you put it in before the 2 hours, you're gonna get a situation where it's not gonna have the dough shape. It's gonna pancake out. If you keep it in for over 2 hours, make sure that it's even more tightly wrapped. I would put it either in saran wrap or a Ziploc bag, but I go ahead and roll it into a ball. Then I put it in my little cinnamon bowl here, my cinnamon and sugar bowl. And then got it here. He's all nice and sprinkled. I'm gonna put it on my cookie pan here, which I'm using just some parchment paper. And then I smash him down till he's about this thick. They will expand a fair amount. They don't expand a super amount, but they do a little bit. So you want to give them some space. And I would not store this cookie dough for more than 24 hours in the fridge. If you were to do that, I think you're going to lose a lot of moisture. I think it's going to get drier and drier, and I think it's going to be harder to work with. So just take those guys, roll them. We've preheated our oven to 350 degrees. And these bake at 350 degrees in a traditional oven for, I take them out at 11 minutes. If you wanted them a little crispier, you could probably go to 13 minutes, but they've got a nice crunch to them already, so I wouldn't push it past that. And so I'll go ahead and get these last cookies in, and then I'll show you the snickerdoodles that I made earlier. And we'll have made ourselves some delicious cookies that were very versatile to go with our chai, which will be great for the holidays. And hopefully it'll be a situation where it is the kind of food that if you are sitting down at the table, whether on your own this year or with friends that are nearby or living with you, or sitting maybe on a phone call with your loved ones, that while we know statistically and biologically that we may be feeling elevated levels of stimulation and maybe even stress because food is on the table, I hope that these cookies and the smell of them and the smell of the tea put you in a state where you are feeling celebratory, you're feeling love, and you're feeling connection to your past, to recipes that maybe you were able to share with other people throughout your life, or also have people share with you. So I've got my cookies here. They're gonna go into the oven. Alexa, set a timer for 11 minutes.
11 minutes.
And I'll show you
Starting now.
the recipe, the snickerdoodles. So same cookie. I'll actually go grab one of the chocolate or the sugar cookies too. So these are all the same cookie. And let me get my flashlight here. It's going to kind of wash it out. That's okay. So snickerdoodle. And then sugar cookie, the pink on there. And then I just went ahead and took the toasted coconut and put almond in it. So I've got a little bit of a toasted coconut cookie here as well. So hopefully you're able to find some good ingredients to make this recipe and to make other recipes. I hope that I was able to show you just how easy it is to create delicious, amazing, historical recipes that don't rely on cow's milk or traditional butters or things like that. And I hope that this is able to be a part of your future traditions as well. And thank you very much for joining us.